Just over a week ago, a friend of mine sent me a set of 21 photographs on WhatsApp depicting old time, and at the end of the series, there was the saying, "Don't forget where you come from." The pictures included someone ironing, with the iron being warmed on a coal pot, ice cream being made with the old bucket, persons traveling on a donkey cart, and a box of soap powder which has long been repackaged and discarded. While some of our people are still relegated to utilizing some of these seemingly outdated implements, our children and grandchildren today, for the most part, find these things rather strange and laughable as they live in a different age. And yet the reality is that life is dynamic and things which belong to the present are constantly changing and moving towards assignment to another era, giving way to the new. The resurrection of Jesus Christ is one phenomenon which brings about a whole new future out of the old order. Theologian Walter Brueggemann captures this inbreaking of the new future from the old order in this way. The resurrection of Jesus is the ultimate energizing for the new future. The wrenching of Friday had left only the despair of Saturday, and there was no reason to expect Sunday after Friday. There is not any way to explain the resurrection out of the previously existing reality. The resurrection can only be received and affirmed and celebrated as the new action of God, whose province is to create new futures for people and to let them be amazed in the midst of despair. The resurrection of Jesus is not to be understood as an isolated act of God's power. It is a new history, open to all, but peculiarly received by the marginal victims of the old order. On Good Friday, the people witnessed the violence inflicted by the conspiracy of the duly constituted authority of the state and the religious leaders of the day in the condemnation of Jesus to death by crucifixion as a common criminal. The Jewish leaders had agitated the crowd into a riot, had falsely accused Jesus, and gotten the Roman ruler Pontius Pilate to condemn Jesus by execution. As far as they were concerned, Jesus had attacked their temple, their sacrifices, and their places of privileged authority. It was now finished. The job was done. Jesus and the Jesus movement were dead. Perhaps they celebrated among themselves, saying, "We got rid of that troublemaker at last." The gospel which will be read in our churches on Easter Day is from John chapter 20, verses 1 to 18, and presents Mary Magdalene as the first person to encounter the resurrected Christ. In this encounter, she experienced a transformation as the risen Jesus affirmed her by calling her by her name, while pointing to his own transformation and triumph over death and the grave. Mary had this encounter while weeping in distress at the mystery of the absent body of Jesus, only to be surprised by the experience of a totally new reality and experience in the appearance of the resurrected Jesus. Many of us come to this Easter weeping for one reason or another, something which is true not only for us as Jamaicans, but across the world, as is evidenced by the images which are beamed across our televisions on a daily basis. For those who weep, this Easter, there is the invitation to encounter Jesus through the witness of his life and ministry, and perhaps in the process, hearing him calling us by name, as he did for Mary in his resurrection appearance, but also in his victory over the violence of crucifixion the violence of political and religious systems, and the finality of death. The resurrection of Jesus represents the defeat of that which we fear, namely death. Dietrich Bonhoeffer elaborates on this defeat of death for the Christian in this way, and I quote, "Where it is recognized that the power of death is broken, where the miracle of the resurrection and new life shine into the middle of the world of death, there one demands no eternities from life and takes from life what there is, not everything or nothing, but the good and the bad, the important and the unimportant, joy and pain. There one does not hold on desperately to life, nor does one lightly throw it away. There one is satisfied with measured time and does not ascribe eternity to earthly things. There one allows death the limited right that it still has. The new humanity and the new world, however, are expected only from a standpoint beyond death, from the power that has overcome death. The resurrected Christ bears the new humanity within himself, the last marvelous yes of God to the new humanity." End of quote. The resurrection of Jesus, however, cannot be seen in isolation from his life, witness, crucifixion, and death, as they come together as part of the divine expression of his love for the redemption of humanity, and thus the creation of a new humanity, humanity as God intended us to be. And we are reminded in another place by Bonhoeffer, Jesus Christ, the human being, means that God enters created reality and that we can and should be human beings before God. Jesus Christ, the crucified one, means that God pronounces his final judgment on his fallen creation. Jesus Christ, the resurrected one, means that God, out of love and omnipotence, puts an end to death and calls a new creation into being and gives new life. The image of death as a necessary concomitant of resurrection can obscure the reality that, for the Christian, resurrection speaks not just to something that relates to what happens after this life is ended, but something that has everything to do with life right now in this world. Former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, speaks to the way in which the resurrection of Jesus changes our understanding of reality in this way. He says, "If the resurrection is about an all-important, decisive, central moment around which the whole history of the world pivots and turns in a new direction, something has happened within history that has altered what is possible." He continues, "The gospel of the resurrection speaks into those places and environments of despair, where people don't believe that change is possible and don't believe that God's rule can already be real in the hearts and lives of human beings. It speaks into an environment where people assume that we are moving towards a death that is simply the end of every story, and our relation with God, if we have one, is just in this life." Each year, as Easter approaches, there are articles appearing in the print media and television features which seek to question the reality of the resurrection of Jesus, to disprove it, as well as those which seek to dismiss the observance of Easter as a purely pagan observance. The resurrection is not something for those who have no faith in Jesus to prove. All of the narratives in the Gospels show that the resurrected Jesus appears only to those who are of the community of believers. In a work entitled Life Conquers Death, John Arnold has this to say on the matter. He says, "The Christ who rises to be crowned King of the universe does not appear in the first instant to Pilate or Caiaphas or to any of the mighty upon earth. There is no room for the risen Christ in those who are full of themselves. He rises to the brokenhearted, to the poor in spirit, to the meek and lowly, filling the empty with good news and good things, giving them the faith to see, the faith to know, the faith to follow in his risen life." I close with some words from the biblical scholar Walter Brueggemann. He says, "The resurrection of Jesus is the ultimate energizing for the new future. The wrenching of Friday had left only the despair of Saturday, and there is no reason to expect Sunday after Friday. There is not any way to explain the resurrection out of the previously existing reality. The resurrection can only be received and affirmed and celebrated as the new action of God, whose province is to create new futures for people and to let them be amazed in the midst of despair." May you have a blessed and life-renewing Easter.